In previous videos, we were looking at measurement scale, nominal, ordinal, interval, and ratio, and how to create attitude scales. Well, let's now take that information and actually design questions for our survey. So we are going to create a questionnaire, and a questionnaire is a set of questions designed to generate the data necessary to accomplish our research objective. Accomplish the research objective. So going back to some of our earlier videos and discussions, we have a management problem or opportunity. We take that management decision problem, we converted that into a research problem, and we have videos on how to do that. And then we create research objectives. How will you know if your research project is successful? So if you are hiring people to do this research, you create a research request where you define that management decision problem, you identify those research objectives. What do you want the researcher to do? How will you know? So we have deliverables, and then research objectives. How will you know if the research is successful? And so our questionnaire needs to be designed to generate the data in order to accomplish those research objectives, and really just to give us data that the organization can use to make decisions. So we want it to be something that can impact the organization in terms of leading to action. So we want to make sure that we only ask questions really that are necessary in order to direct that organization. So our questionnaire, that set of questions, is also called a survey instrument. And what we want to do is talk about what makes a good questionnaire and the questionnaire design process. So we're going to go through the questionnaire design process and look at good questions and bad questions. All right, so what makes a good question? So before we even start generating the questions, we need to know what are the decisions or the actions that our organization would take based on the information that's developed. So we really only want to have questions and collect data that help solve that management decision problem. So we really would start by making a list of our research objectives if we don't already have them in a research proposal or in a research request. And that's because what we're going to see as we create our survey is that the last thing we'll do is we'll come back and say, okay, does every question align with that research objective? Does it help us in terms of that management decision problem? Okay. Now, if you're doing this, if you're creating a survey for a client, you would want to have them sign off on the questionnaire. So they're going to review the questions, make sure it covers what they expect it to cover before you start handing it out or collecting data. Now, the other thing is the questionnaire needs to take into consideration the respondent, the individual who is going to be completing the survey. Okay, so is it in a level of reading that they can understand? Does it use words that are geared towards them? If it is going to be to a certain group, is it worded in that language? So if it's to engineers, is it in terms of terminology and the way that engineers refer to things? Or is it to the more general purchasing public, in which case we want to make sure that the reading level of a survey is more about the 10th grade level, not using overly complicated words or jargon. So we want to make sure that it is appropriate for the group that is completing it. Remember that if it's poorly designed, so people are confused as to what you're asking for, it's difficult to know which questions to answer or not. If it takes too long to fill it out, people get annoyed, they quit partway through, and you don't get the data you need to make decisions. The other thing we find is that if people get turned off in a survey, then they are less likely to participate in future research. And remember, in our discussions about ethics, One of our ethical obligations is to create confidence in research in general that creates an incentive for others to participate in future research. So we want to make sure that we have that in mind as we are designing it. Okay. The other thing we need to consider as we are making our questionnaire is the ability to analyze the results. So that means it needs to be easy to code. It needs to be easy to prep it in order to do the analysis. And so when we talk about preparing for the analysis, the term in research is clean. So we want to be able to clean the data. That doesn't mean you're manipulating it. That means you are prepping it so that you are making sure that what is collected accurately represents what people intended when they filled it out, and that it is in a form that we can use to do the analysis. So we need to look at our ability to edit and to code. So let's just define some of things. So editing is where we go through. See if I can write this way. So editing is where we go through each question or each questionnaire, so the whole survey, to ensure that skip patterns were followed and the required questions were filled out. Were filled out. So if we're looking at a questionnaire like what you see here, question 4A is a skip question. So based on the answer to this question, do you use a cream rinse or a hair conditioner? Well, that's if they answer that they don't use a cream rinse or a hair conditioner, notice they skipped to question 5A. And that's because 4B and 4C are based on people or answered by people who know how a cream rinse or a hair conditioner works. So if you answered yes, you use a cream rinse or a hair conditioner, then we can ask you questions about whether it's a pour on or spray, how often you use it. So when we are looking at the completed survey results, we would want to go through and check anyone who responded no to question 4A. There should be no data for them on 4B and 4C. They should be empty in our spreadsheet. And those who answered yes in 4A should have responses for 4B and 4C. So as we are cleaning the data, preparing it for analysis, one of the things we're going to do is edit and check that these skip patterns were met. If you answer, and this can be a problem particularly with paper surveys, if you asked 4A and they wrote no, and then they went ahead and answered 4B, then what you would do is remove whatever response they put in for 4B. You don't remove their entire survey. You simply remove their response from 4B because there shouldn't be one because they don't use the cream rinse. Okay, so we're not manipulating the data. We're removing data that shouldn't be there based on that skip pattern. Okay. Now, we also do coding as we prepare for analysis, and coding is the process of grouping and assigning numeric codes to various responses. So what we would do with our survey that you see here is that we could make this for 4C. We could code that 1, code that 2, code that 3. By doing this, we can then in our spreadsheet, instead of having the words less than once a week every time someone picked the first response to 4C, we would just show it as a 1. What this allows us to do is then use things like in Excel like count if, and tell us how many times this occurred, what percentage people chose number 1. what percentage chose number 2. So it allows for a more expedited analysis because we can simply just kind of do equals count if across all the questions and drag it across all the questions so that, and actually let me just show you how to do that while we're talking about it. All right, so let me just pull Excel over here and let's just make this a little bit easier to see so we can keep that question there. Okay, so let's suppose this is respondent number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, whatever, right? And let's make this a little bigger just so we can see it. All right, so here this column is going to be our respondents. And then here's the answer to the question. So we could have one that said, let's suppose that 1. So you might have done this, say, in a Google form or SurveyMonkey, and the output you get says less than once a week, and maybe person number 1 and 3 and 4 and 6 all chose that, and these other people said once a week. Okay. And the next question asks, how would you describe the texture of your hair? So fine, fine, coarse, regular, coarse, and coarse. Okay. So one of the reasons that we code is to make the analysis, if we're doing it in Excel, very quick. Because the challenge we have is that in this case, we have ordinal data in our question 4C. We have nominal data in question 5A. If we wanted to do count if for the whole set of data and see how many people said less than once a week, then we would need to have less than once a week here. And the problem, of course, is that if it's not formatted exactly the same, then it won't find it. So often we'll have some key somewhere where we can say, okay, if it matches this, so I'm just going to remove that. Okay, oops. And make sure my parentheses goes the other direction. Okay, so what we get is we get 4 people who said less than once a week. But the problem is I can't drag that down. I could technically here, I guess, because it gives me once a week as the next answer, but that's unlikely to be the case, that you have all of the options in the first rows in order. So instead, what you have to do is you would have to say, okay, well, let me find the next option. And okay, this one is less than once a week. This one is once a week. And we'd have to format that. Well, the problem is when I get to the next column, I would do count if, and I would do this column here. And then I have to find, okay, this one is going to look for the word fine. And the next one is going to look for the word coarse. Equals count if, highlight this, and find the word coarse. Right, so it's very time consuming to build this. If instead, when we enter in this information into our spreadsheet, if instead we'd already coded this, so less than once a week were the 1s, and once a week were the 2s, and then we had coded the next one here where fine is 1 and coarse is 2 and regular is 3. And we create a key that we can see then exactly which one is which. So then for this question, fine is 1, coarse is 2, regular is 3. Our spreadsheet instead would just be, oops, let's not move that around, would just be a list of numbers here. So that means that what we could do is, instead of doing this one at a time here, we could, and you think about this for all the questions, we could make a list here, 1, 2, 3, maybe other questions have a 4 and 5 in their code. And then what we can do is do equals count if, highlight our range here, And we are going to not put a $sign in front of the H's because we're going to drag it over, but we're going to put it in front of the numbers. And that way we can drag down and have it then do it for, keep it on that same data set. So then we're going to say, okay, find all of the ones. And we are going to have this one, we're going to put a $sign here in front of the G. So notice when I do this, it tells me that there are 4 ones in this column. And because of the where I put the little $signs, notice that when I drag it down, it's going to keep my, my list of data, but it's now going to look for how many 2s and how many 3s and how many 4s. And so in this particular data here, we only have 1s and 2s, so only less than once a week and once a week. Now, the benefit of doing this coding is I can actually just keep going across. And what you see here now is that I now have, for this next question, the one on how would you describe the texture of your hair, I have it set on that column, that variable, and it's looking for all the ones and counting those. And I also have it counting, as we see here, the number of 2s. And so I can, if I have a survey that has 30 questions, if I already have it coded like this and I create this kind of key here with the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe I have some questions that are Likert scale, attitude survey type questions with 7-point scales, I would make this go to 7. But then I can simply just drag this over and it will summarize very quickly all the counts or frequencies for all my questions. So at a quick glance, I can see that for this particular question, more people do less than once a week. And here, there's very few people with regular hair. And I would just keep going. At a quick glance, I can summarize the results of hundreds or thousands of responses without having to do a whole lot of work by hand. If I create a system at the beginning that's easy to code, I create a key where I write out like what you see here, where it says, often I just print out a copy of my survey and I put the code right next to it. And this then allows me to, as I run my Excel, I would have my survey that's coded in front of me, and I would have my data here with all my just numbers and summary, and I can very quickly look for interesting phenomenon. What do I recognize in terms of there's more of one group than another? And then we can also use this, because of the way it's coded, to expedite some of the statistical analysis we'll talk about in future videos. So as we are building our questionnaire, just recap a little bit, it needs to be in alignment with our research objectives and ultimately to make decisions for our organization. It needs to be consider the respondent. What are questions they can actually answer? Is it short? Is it in language they understand? And then is it designed so it's easy to code, to clean? That includes editing so that we can identify the skip patterns and remove any ones where people should not have responded to the question. So in the next couple videos, what we're going to be doing is working through the questionnaire design process. We start with some objectives. We come up with our data collection method. How are we going to get this information? So a survey. It's going to be answered by whom? Is it going to be paper? Is it going to be electronic? How are we going to do it? Is it going to be sent out by email? Is it going to be something where they get a code and they go to a site? How are we actually going to collect the information? Then we need to come up with the question response format. Is it going to be multiple choice? Is it going to be open-ended? We need to make sure we have appropriate wording, that our questions are in a layout and flow that makes sense, and we'll talk about how you organize a survey. We would then test out that survey on a couple people we know, maybe a couple people from that relevant population we want to sample from, just to see if they are able to answer it and interpret it the same way we do. Then if we're doing it for a client, we would get them to sign off on that survey. If you are doing it internally for your organization, you would obtain approval from whoever is funding the research or gave you permission to do so. And we would then, revise anything necessary as the results of our pretest, and then we would send it out for implementation. So we're going to be going through this process in our next couple videos.